can't think of it now. Yeah, right. I'm now the oldest surviving member in our school of tenure. No, so well, he's still there. We have a gentleman that has been in the school system, been at our school for 34 years, and has taught for 38 total, and he's retiring this year. And then another lady is retiring, and she's pretty close to that, 34, 35. And then it's me. So now I'm the old person. Yep, me and a few others are within a couple of years of each other. But as far as tenure goes, 20, January will be 23 years. So, yeah. You remember when I was born. That's my mother for you all online with us. Yeah. That's true. That's true. One of the first years I was there, at that time, students could not leave the cafeteria to eat lunch. And I'd gone there and got a tray of lunch and went to leave, and they're like, "You can't leave." I was like, "But I work next door. I'm not a student." Yeah, right. Hey, carded me right there. No. But I wasn't much older than some of the students. That's true. We better get to where we're going. You'll find Matthew chapter 17 kind of led up to this last week with a little bit of anticipation. We've got three records to read through, and we are going to see, if you read carefully with us, you'll be like, wait a minute, that was something different in Matthew and Mark. Luke has a different record. Not a different record, but he starts from a different place, I guess we should say. And again, if you're doing a cursory reading through this, you think I have found the error. I have now found the error in the Bible, and if there's one error, then there's likely many. But we won't find an error tonight. I can promise you that. There is a reasonable explanation, not just some hope of like, well, maybe it was just not what we thought. So Matthew 17, we'll do a real fast kind of review. You know, in the last week or two, we've been studying where Jesus is working in and around several different places. There's been a feeding of 4,000, been a blind man or a deaf man made to speak again and hear again. And then the Pharisees are like, "Give us a sign," and Jesus is like, "Open your eyes." He didn't say that, but that was kind of going through his mind. Then he says, "Who do people say that I am?" And they say, well, some say Elias, and some say John the Baptist. And then he says the famous word that Peter answers. He says, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter says, "Well, thou art the Christ, Son of the living God." And Jesus says, "Well, Simon Bar-Jonas, blessed are thee, because flesh and blood, you didn't learn this of your own accord. My Father has shown you these things." And he goes on to say, it is this bedrock of faith that the entire church is going to be built upon. The fact that I am the Christ, that I am the anointed one, that I am the one that will come, I have come, and I will die for your sins, be raised again the third day. But you have to believe that I am who I say I am. You know, that's a big part of it. And believe is not just the fact of his actual existence, but believe in the fact that he is who I'm resting on. That is the method of belief is not just a mental capacity saying, well, that's Jesus. Because there's a lot of people that said, well, that's Jesus. But it's really the belief that, well, that's Jesus, and he's the one who died for my sins. It's a very personal connection. So that has transpired, and last week we read just a snippet where Jesus goes on and gives them some more information about true discipleship and following him, and then that is what it looks like to follow him is to pretty much forsake all, trust him. There's an acronym there of faith. Forsaking all, I trust him. And so that's the root of it. So here we go. We're going to start chapter 17, verse number 1. And just we'll read through Matthew's account, make a few comments, and we'll go to Mark's account and then Luke's account of this. And this is the account of the Mount of Transfiguration. Now, so named because the event we're about to read, Jesus is transformed before a few of those men's very eyes. It was not that the mount itself, you didn't walk up to it and there was a sign at the bottom like you go to the Smokies and it says, this is Mount LeConte. So it wasn't named that, it's gotten that name from this event that takes place. Chapter 17, verse 1, and after 6 days, that's going to be kind of the hinge point that's going to, some people get all flustered about, so you can kind of tuck that way in the back of your mind. After 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John his brother, and bringeth them up into a high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them. And his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias, talking with him. Then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, and one for Elias. And while he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their face and were sore afraid. And Jesus came and touched them and said, Arise, and be not afraid. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no man save Jesus only. And as they came down from the mountain, Jesus charged them, saying, Tell the vision to no man until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. And his disciples asked him, saying, Why then say the scribes that Elias must first come? And Jesus answered and said unto them, Elias truly shall come first, and restore all things. But I say unto you that Elias is come already. And they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listed. And likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer of them. Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist. So there's the account, right? The account of the transformative act. So let's pull a few things from this, and then we'll go read the other accounts tonight. We may have a quicker lesson tonight than sometimes normal, but this is a pretty, pivotal story. So far we've got Jesus working with a whole group of men, and they've been seeing different things. They've seen him heal people. They've seen him bring some people back to life. They've seen him perform miracles, or he's taken a little and turned it into much. We have a song like that. They've seen him calm the seas. Even that got their attention. They said, what manner of man is this, that even the winds and the waves obey him? And now they get to see him, a glimpse of who he truly is. And some of these other famous, very famous people out of the Bible, two of the most probably illustrious men in the Old Testament. There would be, more that would be pretty recognized. Abraham would fall into that group as far as somebody highly regarded. But even more so, I think Moses was probably the pinnacle of a human that they looked to, because Moses gave them the what? The Ten Commandments, this law that they had been following and ultimately worshiping more of the law than the lawgiver, but that he was held in high regard. And then Elijah, this famous prophet of renown from years past. And so they get just a glimpse of this glory of God. But even more so, they hear from the Lord himself, and he says very few words to him. Matter of fact, Matthew is the only one that records a portion of this. We got to gain it now, because Luke and Mark, the Lord didn't have them record this. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that. I studied through this and it jumped out to me, but maybe I'm wrong. And here's what the Lord said. He said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And then he says this, Hear ye him. Now remember, when we've studied like this before, when we get multiple passages of Scripture talking about the same event, and we look at the differences, right? And we want to kind of take note, and those kinds of things are easy, or not easy, but are neat to see, because we get to see maybe the more human side of the writer, that something maybe really stuck out in their mind, something jumped out to them that the Lord wanted there. I mean, this wasn't of their own doing. The words that we read tonight were very much, given to them by the Lord, but He still used them as people. And I think that's where we get to look at those differences and say, wow, the Lord used him as an individual. There's something that kind of caught with him. But at the same time, we keep this in mind. We want to really pay super close attention to what is the same between all these stories, because evidently that is the key of what the true intent is. Because each person, the Lord says, make sure this is in your writings. And if I tell you once, it's good. If I tell you twice, it's extra good. If I tell you 3 times, you really need to know this. So we've got the framework, and again, I told you we're going to read through a couple different accounts of this. Mark's account does have a few differences, so let's go ahead and go there. And then that'll give us a chance to get to Luke, and then we can talk about all 3 collectively. So if you want to go to Mark, chapter number 9. And we'll pick it up in verse number 2. Verse number 1 is the ending of Jesus telling them about things to come. But verse number 2, and after 6 days, actually, you know what, let me read that verse, because I didn't read it in Matthew, and that helps build the case for why what Luke records is different, but is talking about something different. And so let me read this. And he said unto them, Jesus finishing his talk to his disciples, verily I say unto you, that there be some of them that stand here which shall not taste of death till they have seen the kingdom of God come with power. Saying that some of you here will see, my power be revealed in this world in a new capacity that you've never seen before. So he ends that conversation, and then we get to verse number 2. And after 6 days, so after this dialogue that he's had with his disciples we studied last week, after 6 days, Jesus taketh with him Peter and James and John, and leadeth them up into a high mountain apart by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. We've seen before where Jesus does choose just a few of his disciples for certain capacities. Anybody remember another event that we studied? It's been several weeks ago. The little girl, yeah. And he took a small group with him for them to see those specific things. And the drawing or the things that we pull out of there is a very simple fact that the Lord has a work and a task for each person, but each person's task or work or ministry, we could phrase it that way, is not the same. If it was all the same, then there would be no differences here. He had something different in mind for some of his other disciples, something that there was going to be for them, but for whatever reason, and this would come back down to, sometimes we talk about the sovereignty of God. We get a little nervous, right? Because are we talking about God is now choosing who will be saved and who won't be saved? Well, I mean, some people talk about it in those terms, but then we have to also go to Scripture and read where he says, well, whosoever calleth upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. And whosoever is a big statement, because at that point, it's you choose or you don't choose. Whosoever will. There's an openness to that the Lord, is he sovereign? Yes. Would he have the authority to say, you are my creation? Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Yes. Couldn't argue with that. I mean, he is the creator of the world. Did he choose to do it that way? No. But does that limit his sovereignty in other places of our life? But we're also still taught, Jesus himself gave us the example prayer, Father, not my will, but thine be done. We see this openness to man's choice, but we also see many accounts where The Lord was, I don't know, maybe the word's persistent. Jonah comes to mind, you know. Jonah, I want you to go to Nineveh. I don't want to go to Nineveh. I understand that. I want you to go to Nineveh. That's not where I want to go. All right? The Lord put lots of things in Jonah's life to get him to choose to go to Nineveh. And even gave him a free fish ride there. So we see God's sovereignty, so we can't ignore it. We can't say that it doesn't exist. He is the creator of the universe. But we also balance that with the fact that he says, but I also give my creation free will to choose me. Because ultimately, what would bring him the most honor and glory? Robots or free will agents? And he doesn't need honor and glory because he is, there's probably a great word that I can't think of right now, egocentric. This is not it's all about me because I need it to be about me, because if not, my feelings get hurt. It's all about me because you can't believe all the wonderful things that I can do in your life. I know the plans that I have for you, and they are good and not evil, right? I mean, we can just see all those things. But here, God chooses. He says, you 3 men come with me. What did the others say? Have no idea. It didn't matter. He said, Peter, James, John. I just happen to think, you know, as I read through this week studying for this, you know, there's 2 sets of brothers in this group. One set of brothers is right here, right now, and the other set of brothers have been split apart. Andrew is not in this group. You know, he's not. And Andrew was going to be okay with that. You know, I don't know. I mean, we don't want to just go off on a total sidetrack here, but, you know, these were real men. So, but the Lord said, you 3 come with me. So we read that before. That stays the same, right? So that's something to take note of. This part of our story has not changed. He leadeth them up into a high mountain apart by themselves, and he was transfigured before them, and his raiment became shining, exceeding white as snow, so as no fuller on earth can white them. And there appeared unto them Elias and Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter answered and said to Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. And let us make thee 3 tabernacles, one for thee, and one for Moses, and one for Elias. For he wist not what to say, for they were sore afraid. He was a nervous talker. You know, Matthew didn't give us that little snippet, right? And again, we take this as we've studied, and if you're online and following with us, you know, online, you know, there is no biblical record. There's nothing written down that says Mark got his information from Peter. But there is a biblical record that says Mark and Peter worked together. I mean, that there's some evidence there that these 2 men ministered together. And so, you know, just I guess logical thinking leads you to believe that a lot of Mark's information, he may have gotten a lot from Peter. He was around him a lot. And so, you know, I don't know if Peter was like, and I didn't even know what to say. I just started talking. You know, when you don't know what to say, just say something, right? And so he said, well, let's just build something. Let's go to work. Let's do something. Even if we don't know what we're doing, let's just do something. And verse number 7. So after he came up with this idea, it says there was a cloud that overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud saying, This is my beloved Son. Hear him. And suddenly, when they had looked round about, they saw no man anymore save Jesus, only with themselves. And they came down from the mountain, and he charged them that they should tell no man what things they had seen till the Son of Man were risen from the dead. And they kept that saying with themselves, questioning one with another what the rising from the dead should mean. And they asked him, saying, Why say the scribes that Elias must first come? And he answered and told them, Elias verily cometh first, and restoreth all things, and how it is written of the Son of Man, that he must suffer many things, and be set at naught. But I say unto you that Elias is indeed come, and they have done unto him whatsoever they listed, as it is written of him. When he came to his disciples, he saw a great multitude round about. So we kind of end this story there with Mark's account. Let's pull out some differences so far we've got between Matthew and Mark. Did anybody, I guess, hear something you want to share out with everybody else? Yeah, and so that's one thing that we want to at least be mentally aware of. So Mark has a different record of what was said, right? And so now when we have a difference, what we want to start looking at is, all right, what was different? So something didn't change story-wise, but there was just a different remembrance. Something stuck out to Matthew that maybe didn't to Mark, or vice versa, to Mark that didn't Matthew. But then also, if we see a difference, we also want to look for the what? Commonality. We do want to pay close attention to what is the same, because that is going to be the most crucial part. So in Matthew's account, we hear a phrase, "This is my beloved son," right? And then he ends with, "Hear ye him." Mark doesn't share that middle phrase with us. He doesn't share with us, "This is my beloved son." He just very simply says, out of the cloud, "In whom I'm well pleased." Sorry, that's the difference. I was like, that ain't right. He doesn't say, Matthew says, "In whom I am well pleased." That's the difference. The similarities is, "This is my son. This is my beloved son. Listen to him." And so there's the similarity. Matthew gives us an extra detail. Much like if we're having a conversation, and our pastor probably uses the greatest example, that ladies many times speak in fine print and men speak in headlines. So here's the important part. This is what you need to know. Not a lot of extra things. Nothing wrong with the extra things. It definitely adds flavor. It adds description. It adds, if you're painting a word picture, it adds more details. But the basis, the things that we need to know, "This is my son." What he says is important. And so that's what we get out of Mark's record. A couple other things just quickly. We see in Mark's where these men wrestle a little bit with what they've learned. They I don't know if struggle's a good word here, but we read it in verse number 10, that they kept that saying with themselves, questioning one another what the rising from the dead should mean. Even though the Lord is leading them and rebuilding them, and one of my favorite examples was last week. Remember where he healed the blind man? And it says that he took him by the hand and he led him out of the city. And then this first part, he says, "What do you see?" And he started to see some things, but they weren't real clear. And then he shares more with him. He touches him again. He does another act, and then he sees it very clearly. Just a beautiful picture of what these disciples and what we go through as Christians that we don't see very clearly for a while. Maybe until we die, right? I mean, there's still things that we just don't fully understand, but we do learn more and more. So these men are wrestling with this idea. What does he mean, risen from the dead? We've seen him do that to other people, but he's now put himself, because his self-phrase is the Son of Man, right? So he's connected himself with this, and they're starting to I don't really get what you're talking about, but I don't like what I hear either. So that's something that Mark brings to our attention. All right, let's go look at Luke's account. So Luke, chapter number 9. Everybody find that? So Luke, for us to do this real justice, we need to read a little bit more in Luke. But for time's sake, we're not going to read all of chapter number 9. But Luke has a little different on-ramp as we get to this story. You know, the other guys, if we were to read just before what we read tonight in those Gospels, in Matthew and Mark's Gospels, we would see a more condensed time frame. Luke's time frame is a little bit more stretched out in chapter number 9. There's a little bit more that we could read timeline-wise. It's not as condensed. He doesn't cover as many things in a smaller portion of time as Matthew and Mark do. So that's one of the things I want us to point out. And so let's look at chapter 9, verse number 1. And he called his 12 disciples together and gave them power and authority over all devils and to cure diseases and sent them to preach. We read that in the other Gospels a whole chapter ago. You know, we studied through that, it felt like, 2 or 3 weeks ago at this time. And Luke has it right at the beginning of chapter number 9. Now, Luke didn't write chapter 9 and start with verse number 1. He's writing Theophilus a letter, right? So this is just the next paragraph as he's writing out. And then he goes in and he talks about, hey, and they fed people. That's in chapter 9, verse 14. There were about 5,000 men, and he said to the disciples, make them sit down in 50s for company, and they did so. And they took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes. That's a long time ago, okay? We don't even get to read in this one where they went back and forth, and Luke doesn't record for us where they went over to the coast, ministered, they came back, they went to the other side of Galilee, fed 4,000, came back, healed the blind man. Luke doesn't give us those things, but he does share with us this confessional of Peter. So look down there at verse number 20. And he said unto them, but whom sayest ye that I am? And Peter answering said, the Christ of God. And straightly he charged them and commanded them to tell no man, saying, the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected of the elders and chief priests and the scribes, and be slain and be raised the 3rd day. They heard that, but we're about to go to the Mount of Transfiguration, and that's when they start struggling with it. It's like, I don't know, in one ear out the other. Didn't hear it the first time, heard it the first time, I'm sure, but just they start really wrestling with it later on. So that brings us up. So we get to chapter number 9, verse 28 is where Luke starts this account of the Mount of Transfiguration. And it came to pass about 8 days after these sayings. That's different. Yeah. Everybody else, Matthew and Mark says 6 days. Okay. So, we found it. We have found the error. No. What we've seen here is Luke is making a reference to a different starting point. He's just his timeline in chapter number 9 is nowhere, and it's not it's in chronological order as far as like it's in order, but he's not saying day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. He's saying, Theophilus, of what I've told you so far, about 8 days later, they also went up here. Matthew and Mark, in their records, are saying, all right, so we're telling you more events closer to this day of Transfiguration. And so from their starting point to the day of Transfiguration was only 6 days. It wasn't a difference in the number of days it takes place. It's just saying, well, Mark's telling us, say, 6 days ago from today was last Thursday. And Luke's saying, well, from last Tuesday, it's 8 days. So you just got to kind of put the pieces together. That's why I say a cursory, just brief reading, like, wait a minute, what's going on? Well, let's leave things where they are in context. So anyway, we've got through that little part. And it came to pass about 8 days after these sayings, he took Peter and John and James and went up into a mountain to pray. And as he prayed, the fashion of his countenance was altered, and his raiment was white and glistening. Behold, there talked with him 2 men, which were Moses and Elias, who appeared in glory and spake of his decease, which he should accomplish at Jerusalem. But when Peter and they that were with him were heavy with sleep, and when they were awake, they saw his glory and 2 men that stood with him. And it came to pass, as they departed from him, Peter said unto Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. And let us make thee 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, and one for Elias, not knowing what he said. And while he thus spoke, there came a cloud and overshadowed them. And they feared as they entered into the cloud. And there came a voice out of the cloud saying, This is my beloved Son, hear him. And when the voice was past, Jesus was found alone. And they kept it close and told no man in those days of any of those things which they had seen. We've got some other things to consider now as we have now gathered all 3 pieces of information and comparing and contrasting them. So let's start with, what have we noticed that has stayed the same between all 3 accounts? Because that's the most important part, right? Always the same 2 with Christ on the mountain, Moses and Elias. So we have that going on. The voice of God stays the same. The message from God stays the same, at least in all the accounts, right? Now some people have a little bit more to say. Matthew had a little bit more to say, in whom I'm well pleased. But the basic message is the same. Peter, James, and John, they're always there. Okay. But now that we've added Luke's to the equation, let's paint this full picture. So in Matthew and Mark's gospel, it's almost like that they were up there and then they saw all this take place and they were mesmerized by it. But Luke tells us that they were asleep. Well, that seems to be a pattern that will continue on into the Garden of Gethsemane. Because he takes these men and takes them a little farther and he says, just stay and pray. And they fall asleep and he chastises them a little bit. And he goes and prays again. He comes back and they're sleeping again. And so the spirit is strong, but the flesh is weak, right? He understands that. So these men, they're worn out ministry-wise. They hiked up this big, tall, in Mark it says, unto a very high mountain. So they didn't just walk up here to the top of Mandeville Ridge, which is not a bad hike. I can imagine this being like going to Mount LeConte. They climbed. They were wore out by the time they got up there, and their physical tiredness, overtook them. What else do we learn in Luke's account that we didn't learn in the others' account? Building on that, so Mom says the first time Jerusalem is mentioned, yes, but it's actually the first time the conversation is expounded upon. We don't get to read what they talk about in Matthew and Mark at all. We just know that they're having a conversation. God, through his infinite wisdom, has shared with Luke, well, this was their discussion. And let's read through that, because we've not done that before. I lost it. Verse 31. Who appeared in glory, talking about Elias and Moses. And what was their discussion about? His death. Yeah. It's almost like that this was planned from eternity past, Surprise, surprise. That this lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And, so we get a glimpse here. Can I explain it all? No, there's no way. God in the flesh, coming in the form of a man and taking on all those attributes. And here, this discussion with Moses and Elias. Also, great representations. Jesus, there's a lot of comparisons that he will use in his own ministry. He will mention, as Moses lifted up the serpent, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, right? And so there's this growing body of evidence for his disciples to start processing of, he's the one what we believe was coming. They've already confessed that, but they don't have the expectation of his dying, because they've been preaching this kingdom gospel, right? Now let's go back to review that. What is the kingdom? Rule and reign. That's what they're expecting. They're not expecting death and sacrifice. That was not how they envisioned this going down, but that was the plan. Why was it the plan? Was he abandoning this idea of kingdom? No. But foreknowledge, all knowledge, omniscience, that's not a word, but I made it up. Being omniscient let you know that, well, as a matter of fact, I wrote this in the Old Testament, I'd be despised and rejected of men, right? And my own, I would go into my own and they would receive me not. But I'm still going, knowing full well all this is going to happen. But I also know that this is the bigger picture. This is what's hidden behind the veil, for lack of better terms. This is the shadowy part that nobody really understood or perceived, this church age, this age of grace coming forth. So they're talking about that. That is the topic of discussion. And don't forget that topic of discussion, I don't know how to say it, I'll just have to say it. Who was he at that moment? He was a transfigured God in the flesh, in glory and honor. The only one that could do this. And so that's what the discussion was about, because God in the flesh would die for our sins. God would die for our sins. You know, the perfect, the Holy One. So those are the similarities, and those are some of the differences that we can pull out from between those two as we study all three of these records of the Transfiguration. Anybody else got something that they want to add to this? Yeah, he told these three specifically. You know, he says, "Hey, boys." Yeah, correct. Go ahead. In verse 36, it says, and Jesus was found alone, and they kept it close and told no man in those days any of those things which they had seen. You know, in Luke's account, we would just say it's like they decided to keep it a secret, right? In Matthew and Mark, we have the understanding that Jesus said not a word. Yeah. He said, y'all won't utter a word of this. Again, we have to take, I guess, maybe some liberty in just thinking through this. But, you know, somebody is going to have to lead later on. You know, Christ is going to be the head of the church, right? But there has to be an earthly leader here. Somebody that is so confident, so 100% sold out in this gospel message that nothing's going to stop them. And so we see the Lord setting these three men up for that ministerial work. Does that make them greater than the others? No. Matter of fact, that question's coming pretty quickly. We may read that next week. It says, who's going to be the greatest? And he says, well, if you want to be the greatest, then you're going to serve the most, right? You know, and that's the example that he leaves here. But you know, he is building this. I don't know. I just maybe wrongly seeing this, but that's how I see it at the moment. Is, you know, these men have been called out for this part of this ministry. Again, no better. But we had a potential interview later this week for a position that's going to open up at school, and the person that applied for it, he's not going to interview with us now. He's had another opportunity come up, but he serves in the military, and he's had the opportunity to go to. And there's I wish I could think of the name. Dad, maybe you'll be able to help me here. But there's a school for leaders. You know, it's like the school of officers and generals. I don't know. It's something like that. And so the men tasked with lead, they're given another training session, another thing that they need to go to be prepared for the task that will be coming to them in order to lead those or that effort. And to me, I just see the Lord in His infinite wisdom, in His we used it before, in His sovereignty. He said, you'll be the ones that I'll have do this. You know, if we fast forward till after the crucifixion, when Peter is absolutely destroyed, right? what's he tell him? He said, go feed my sheep. You know, I have equipped you. I have called you. I have equipped you to do this. Go do it. You know, and I can imagine, you know, the Lord allowing, you know, the Spirit of God to draw Peter's mind to some of these real intimate experiences, you know. Not that he was going to duplicate this, but, you know, because the devil wasn't going to give up. He wasn't going to say, oh, Peter, I failed getting you once. I'm not going to bother you anymore. You know, Jesus told Peter, he goes, he's desired to sift you like what? Wheat. But I have prayed for you. And when you are restored, or when you're in your right mind, you will follow me. And I can just imagine these being those touch points of strength. And I would dare say it's not an overstatement to say that each of us at some moment in our life, the Lord has given us a touch point. Something that we go back to and say, well, you know, I remember that. You know, I remember that moment of encouragement. I remember that moment of correction. Guaranteed, Peter never forgot it. I mean, they were talking about it amongst themselves. We read that in Mark, like, what did we just hear? What did we just see? You know, it changed them. And you know, we'll close. We're not rambling, but you know, there's a great illustration that the Lord uses of Himself and us, and it talks about Him being the potter and us being the clay. And so what is He doing to these men right now? He's molding them into who He needs them to be. So, anyway, question, comment?